My family skipped the biggest night of my career because of a sick dog. But 3 days later, when Forbes announced my startup sold for $80 million cash, my father texted me saying, "Family dinner at 7 sharp, we need to discuss your future." I showed up not with a check, but with a forensic audit that would send my brother-in-law to prison. Before I tell you how I destroyed their perfect little world, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to remind your family that you are not their retirement plan. I am Zara King, 32 years old, and this is how I taught my family a lesson they would never forget. I stood on the stage of the Grand Ballroom at the Ritz-Carlton in Washington, D.C., holding the heavy crystal trophy for Tech Innovator of the Year, while the blinding stage lights burned against my skin. The room was packed with the city's elite venture capitalists, politicians, and industry titans, all applauding politely. But I was not looking at them. I was staring down at table number 1, the VIP table right in front of the stage. I had paid $10,000 to reserve that table. I had sent the invitations 3 months ago. I had confirmed the menu options 2 weeks ago. And it was completely empty. 5 chairs. No parents, no sister, no brother-in-law. Just empty white tablecloths staring back at me like a gap-toothed smile mocking my achievement. The applause faded into a dull roar in my ears as my phone buzzed in the clutch purse I was holding against the podium. I managed to glance down at the screen while the host was listing my achievements in cybersecurity. It was a text from my mother, Vivian. "Sorry, Zara, but Coco, my sister Ebony's poodle, is vomiting. We are all at the emergency vet. We cannot make it. Choo-Choo is very sensitive, and Ebony is hysterical. Have fun with your little award." I felt the heat rise up my neck, suffocating me. A dog. They missed the pinnacle of my career for a dog. I looked out at the sea of strangers and forced a smile that felt like it was cracking my face into pieces. I gave a short speech thanking my team and my mentors. I did not thank my family. When I walked off stage, the silence from that empty table screamed louder than the applause. The waiter assigned to their table looked at me with pity. He asked if I wanted him to box up the dinners. I told him to throw them in the trash. I went straight to the valet stand, my heart pounding with a mix of humiliation and a rage so pure it felt like gasoline in my veins. It started to rain, a cold DC downpour that soaked through my silk gown within seconds. As I waited for my beat-up Honda Civic to be brought around, I pulled out my phone and opened Instagram. I knew I shouldn't look, but I had to know. There at the top of my feed was a story posted 5 minutes ago by my sister Ebony. The video showed my parents' living room in Potomac. The fireplace was roaring, casting a warm golden glow over the room. My mother was laughing, her head thrown back, holding a glass of expensive red wine. My father, Julian King, the retired judge, was sitting in his leather armchair, cutting a cigar with precision. And there was Coco, the poodle, jumping around, happily chasing a diamond-studded ball across the Persian rug. The caption read, "Family night in with the best people. No filters, no drama. Just us." They lied. They were not at the vet. They were sitting at home 20 minutes away, drinking vintage wine and laughing while I stood alone in a room full of strangers clutching a piece of glass. They had chosen comfort over me. I did not get into my car to go home to my cramped apartment. I turned the ignition and drove straight toward Potomac, toward the sprawling estate where I grew up. The rain was coming down in sheets by the time I pulled into the circular driveway. The house was lit up like a beacon of wealth and exclusion. I could see the golden glow from the floor-to-ceiling windows. I could see the silhouette of my brother-in-law Brad raising a toast. I did not have an umbrella, so I stormed up the stone steps, my designer gown heavy with water, my hair plastered to my skull. I did not ring the doorbell. I used the key I had kept for emergencies and pushed the heavy oak door open. The sound of jazz music and laughter hit me first. The air smelled of expensive candles and roasted lamb. I walked into the drawing room, dripping rainwater onto the pristine marble floor, creating a puddle that expanded with every second I stood there. The conversation stopped instantly. My sister Ebony was lounging on the cream velvet sofa looking perfect in her designer loungewear, her skin glowing. My brother-in-law, Brad, a white hedge fund manager with a smile that always looked like a sneer, was standing by the bar cart, holding a bottle of vintage Dom Perignon. And my mother Vivian was adjusting a massive arrangement of white lilies. "Oh, look who it is," Brad said, breaking the silence. He did not ask why I was wet. He did not ask about the award. He just smirked, raising his glass in a mock salute. "The prodigal daughter returns. You are dripping on the floor, Zara. That marble is porous, you know." I stood there shivering, the crystal trophy still clutched in my hand like a weapon. "You said the dog was sick," I said, my voice trembling, not with cold, but with the effort of not screaming. "You said you were at the emergency vet." Ebony laughed, a light tinkling sound that used to make me feel small when we were children. She reached down and petted the poodle who was currently chewing on a squeaky toy. "Oh, Zara, grow up." That was a white lie. We did not want to hurt your feelings. Coco did look a little sad earlier, so we thought it best not to leave her alone. "Hurt my feelings," I repeated, stepping further into the room, my wet shoes squeaking on the expensive floor. "You left me alone at the biggest event of my career." I sat at a table for 10 by myself. Brad stepped forward, swirling his champagne. "Let us be honest, Zara," he said, his voice dripping with condescension, the way he always spoke to me, like I was a slow child. "I told the family we should not go. I mean, what is this award really? Tech Innovator of the Year. It is a participation trophy for a little coding project. It is not like you closed a merger or won a landmark case. It is cute, but it is not worth ruining our Friday night. We have real stress, Zara. We deal with real money. We needed a family night." My mother finally looked up from her flowers. She looked at my wet dress with distaste, pinching her nose slightly. "Brad is right, dear. You know how intense his work is. Managing millions of dollars is exhausting. Your little app thing is a nice hobby, but you cannot expect us to treat it like a real career. Now please go into the mudroom and dry off before you ruin my Persian rug. That rug cost more than your car." I looked at them. My family. The people who were supposed to be my support system. They looked at me not with love but with annoyance, like I was a stray cat that had wandered in and soiled their furniture. "Is that what you think?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "That my company is a hobby? That fraud detection software used by 3 regional banks is a hobby?" Ebony rolled her eyes, checking her perfectly manicured nails. "Well, it is not exactly dermatology, is it? I save lives, Zara. I fix people's faces so they can face the world. You write code in a dark room, and Brad manages wealth. He builds futures. You just play on computers. We are proud of you in a cute way, but do not expect us to worship you." Just then my father, Julian King, descended the grand staircase. He was wearing his smoking jacket, looking every inch the retired judge who demanded order in his court. He saw me standing there soaking wet, a puddle forming around my feet, and he frowned. "Zara, why must you always be so dramatic?" he said, his voice booming. "You come in here tracking mud and water, disrupting a peaceful evening. Is this about that dinner?" "It was an awards gala, Dad," I said, my voice rising for the first time. "I won. I won against candidates from Google and Amazon." "You won a piece of glass," he countered, walking past me to the bar. "You could have won cases. You could have been a partner at a law firm by now if you had listened to me. You had the grades for Harvard Law, Zara, but no. You had to be rebellious. You had to go into tech. You had to be the black sheep." I looked past him to the wall where the family portraits hung. There was a massive oil painting of the 4 of them: Mom, Dad, Ebony, and Brad. I was not in it. Next to it was a framed photo of Ebony standing next to a white Porsche with a red bow. "I remember that day," I said, pointing at the photo. "That was Ebony's 18th birthday. You bought her a car, a $50,000 car, because she got into the pre-med program you wanted." "Yes, because she earned it," my mother said, straightening a lily. "She followed the plan." "And on my 18th birthday, I continued ignoring her. You handed me a cardboard box and told me to pack my things. You kicked me out because I wanted to study computer science instead of pre-law. You told me if I wanted to waste my life, I could do it under someone else's roof. That was tough love, Brad interjected, taking a sip of his champagne and leaning against the mantel. And look, it worked. You are scraping by. You have a job. You are not on the street. You should be thanking them for building your character. I am not scraping by, I said, my voice low and dangerous. Brad laughed, a harsh barking sound. Oh, come on, Zara. I saw your car outside. That Honda has more dents than a golf ball. You live in a studio apartment in a bad neighborhood. I have seen your shoes. They are 2 seasons old. You are 32 years old and you have 0 assets. Meanwhile, Ebony and I just closed on our 3rd vacation home in the Hamptons. That is success. That is what a legacy looks like. Not a plastic trophy in a wet dress. My father walked over to the bar and poured himself a drink, turning his back to me. Brad is right, Zara. We hold ourselves to a standard of excellence in this family. We are the kings. We do not celebrate mediocrity. If you want us to show up, then do something that actually matters. Make real money. Build real influence. Until then, stop acting like a victim. The room went silent. The only sound was the rain hammering against the windows and the soft jazz playing in the background. I looked at the crystal trophy in my hand. It represented 10 years of sleepless nights, 10 years of eating ramen noodles while my sister dined at Michelin-star restaurants, 10 years of building algorithms that could detect things the human eye missed. They thought it was worthless. They thought I was worthless because I did not fit their mold. You are right, I said softly. My mother smiled smugly. See, Julian, she is finally listening. Good girl. Now go dry off, and maybe Brad can explain to you how an IRA works so you can start saving for retirement. I walked over to the ornate trash can by the fireplace. It was gold-leafed, probably imported from Italy, worth more than my rent. I held the trophy over it. You are right, I repeated louder this time, my voice echoing off the high ceilings. This trophy does not matter to you, because you cannot spend it. You cannot drive it. You cannot wear it to the country club. I dropped the heavy crystal trophy into the metal bin. It shattered with a loud crash that made everyone jump. The sound was violent, final. What are you doing? My mother shrieked, rushing forward. That bin is an antique. You could have scratched it. I turned to face them, water dripping from my hair onto my face, mixing with the tears I refused to let fall. I am done, I said. I am done begging for a seat at this table. I am done trying to prove that I am worth something to people who only value net worth. You want real money. You want real influence. Fine. But when I get it, do not expect me to share it. Brad scoffed, shaking his head. Oh, sweetie, do not worry. We do not need your pennies. We have generational wealth. We have portfolios you could not even understand. I looked at him. Really looked at him. I saw the slight tremor in his hand holding the glass. I saw the sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool room. I saw the way his eyes darted to Ebony every time money was mentioned. My algorithm was designed to spot patterns, to find the cracks in financial facades. And standing there looking at my arrogant brother-in-law, I saw a crack. I walked to the door, leaving a trail of water on the marble. Where are you going? My father demanded. We have not dismissed you. You stay here and clean up this mess. I opened the heavy oak door, letting the cold wind swirl into the warm room, extinguishing the expensive candles. I am dismissing myself, Dad. Enjoy your champagne. Enjoy your house. Enjoy your perfect daughter and your genius son-in-law. Because this is the last time you will see me as the poor little disappointment. I slammed the door so hard the windows rattled. I walked back to my car in the rain, but this time I did not feel cold. I felt a fire burning in my chest. I sat in the driver's seat and gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. They wanted success. They wanted wealth. They wanted power. They had no idea what kind of monster they had just poked. I started the engine. My phone buzzed again. It was an email notification. But it was not from my family. It was from the CEO of Global Crest Bank. The subject line read, "Acquisition offer finalized." I looked back at the mansion looming in the dark. "You have no idea what you just started," I whispered to the rain. I put the car in gear and drove away into the dark night, leaving the mansion and my family behind in the rearview mirror. 72 hours passed in a blur of caffeine and coding. I did not go home to my cramped apartment. I stayed in my office, sleeping on a yoga mat under my desk and surviving on protein bars. I needed to be here. I needed to be ready. My lawyer Darius had finalized the paperwork at midnight on Sunday. The ink was dry. The wire transfer was pending. I was just waiting for the world to wake up. On Monday morning at exactly 6 a.m., the news broke. I was standing by the window of my small office watching the sun rise over the Washington, D.C. skyline when my computer screen lit up with notifications. The Bloomberg headline was in bold black letters that seemed to scream off the monitor. Global Crest Bank acquires forensic fintech startup TruthScan for $80 million in all-cash deal. I stared at the number. $80 million. It was not a valuation based on stock options or future projections. It was cash. Cold, hard liquidity. The article described my algorithm as a revolutionary tool for detecting complex financial fraud and money laundering patterns that human auditors missed. They called me a unicorn. They called me the new face of fintech. In an instant, I went from being the disappointment of the King family to one of the wealthiest self-made women under 35 in the country. My inbox, which usually contained overdue bill notifications and spam, suddenly flooded with thousands of emails. Venture capital firms that had rejected my pitch deck 2 years ago were now sending me congratulatory notes, claiming they always knew I had potential. LinkedIn requests poured in by the second. The silence of my office was replaced by the constant pinging of digital validation. I took a sip of my cold coffee and felt a strange sense of detachment. The world was screaming my name, but I was listening for a specific reaction. Across town in the sprawling King estate, the morning routine was likely unfolding as it always did. I could picture it perfectly. My brother-in-law Brad Sterling would be sitting at the head of the breakfast table in his silk robe, reading the financial news on his tablet while sipping his imported espresso. He prided himself on knowing the market before anyone else. He liked to lecture the family on trends and futures using big words to mask his mediocre returns. I imagined the moment his eyes landed on the headline. He probably choked. The hot coffee would have sprayed over the screen as his brain tried to process the impossible combination of words. Zara King. 80 million. Cash. He would have read it again, his hands starting to tremble. He knew what my software did. He knew because he had mocked it. He had called it a cute little privacy invader. But Brad was a hedge fund manager. He understood better than anyone what it meant when a major bank bought a fraud detection tool for that kind of money. It meant the software worked. It meant it could see things. Things like hidden assets. Things like shell companies. Things like a Ponzi scheme disguised as a high-yield investment fund. I imagined him scrambling for his phone, his fingers slipping on the screen as he dialed my sister Ebony. She would be in her dressing room, applying her 12-step skincare routine, oblivious to the fact that her financial security had just been exposed as a house of cards. Brad would be shouting. He would be demanding to know if she had spoken to me, if I had said anything about the deal. The panic would be setting in. The realization that the sister-in-law they had treated like a servant was now richer than all of them combined, and armed with a tool that could dismantle their lives. Back in my office, my personal cell phone began to vibrate against the desk. It started with a low hum, and then escalated into a frantic dance as call after call came through. I looked at the caller ID. Mom. I let it ring. The screen went dark, then lit up again immediately. Mom. I let it ring. Then Brad. Then Ebony. Then my father. The people who 3 days ago could not be bothered to drive 20 minutes to see me win an award were now desperate to hear my voice. They were not calling to say congratulations. They were calling because the power dynamic had just shifted so violently that the foundation of their world had cracked. They were calling to see if I was still the compliant, quiet Zara they could control, or if I had become something else. I picked up the phone, but I did not answer it. I swiped the power off and dropped it into my purse. I did not need to talk to them. Not yet. I had other plans. A black car pulled up to the curb outside my office building. It was not a rideshare. It was a private car sent by the executives at Global Crest. The driver opened the door for me, and I slid into the leather interior that smelled of new money and silence. We drove to a private airfield on the outskirts of the city. Waiting on the tarmac was a Gulfstream G650. It was sleek and silver, shining under the morning sun. I walked up the stairs and into the cabin. A flight attendant handed me a glass of champagne. It was the same vintage Brad had been drinking the night I stormed out of his house, but this glass was chilled to perfection and offered with genuine respect. I sat in a window seat and watched the ground fall away as we took off. I was heading to a private island in the Caribbean for a week. No internet, no family drama. Just me, the ocean, and the realization that I had won. I needed to let them sweat. I needed them to sit in that big house with their mortgages and their secrets and wonder what I was going to do next. I needed Brad to look at his ledgers and realize that TruthScan wasn't just a product I sold. It was a weapon I owned. When we reached cruising altitude, I turned my phone back on for just a moment to check the time. The lock screen was full. 100 missed calls, 50 text messages, and right at the top, 27 missed calls from Mom. I turned the phone off again and tossed it onto the empty seat across from me. I took a sip of champagne and looked out at the clouds. While I was watching the ocean from my private villa, Brad Sterling was watching his life disintegrate. The view from his corner office in downtown D.C. usually made him feel like a god, but today it looked like the edge of a cliff. He slammed the receiver of his vintage landline down so hard the plastic cracked. The voice on the other end had been an auditor from the Securities and Exchange Commission. They were coming. They wanted to see the ledgers for the Sterling Growth Fund by next Friday. Brad loosened his silk tie, feeling the cold sweat trickle down his back. To the world, he was the golden boy of finance, the man who could turn $1 into 1,000. To the reality of his bank accounts, he was a fraud. There was no growth in the Sterling Growth Fund. There hadn't been for 2 years. He had been running a classic Ponzi scheme using new investments to pay off the dividends of the old ones, skimming a fat management fee off the top to fund his lifestyle. But the market had turned. The new money had stopped coming in, and the hole in his balance sheet was gaping. $5 million. He needed $5 million in liquid cash within 5 days, or he wasn't just going bankrupt, he was going to federal prison. The door to his office swung open and my sister Ebony stormed in. She looked immaculate in a white Chanel suit, but her eyes were wild. She didn't knock. She threw her crocodile Hermes Birkin bag onto one of the leather guest chairs and began pacing the room. "My black card was declined, Brad," she hissed. "I was at the jeweler trying to pick up the earrings for the gala, and the card was declined. Do you know how embarrassing that is?" The sales associate looked at me like I was a pauper. "Fix it," Brad laughed. It was a dry, hollow sound that made Ebony stop pacing. "I cannot fix it, Ebony," he said, staring at his computer screen where the red numbers seemed to be bleeding. "The cards are maxed out. All of them. The mortgage on the Potomac house is 3 months behind. The yacht payments are overdue. We are tapped out." Ebony stared at him, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. "What are you talking about? You just told Dad the fund was up 20% this quarter. You bought that vintage Ferrari last week." "Leased," Brad corrected. "I leased the Ferrari. And I lied to your father. I lied to everyone. The fund is empty, Ebony. It is gone. If I do not find $5 million by Friday, the SEC is going to freeze everything. They will take the house. They will take the cars, they will take your jewelry, and then they will take me to jail. Ebony collapsed onto the sofa the same way she fainted when things got too difficult in childhood. But this wasn't a performance. The color drained from her face, leaving her makeup looking like a mask. "Prison," she whispered. "But we are the kings. We do not go to prison. What will people say? What about my practice? I cannot be married to a felon." Brad walked over to the wet bar and poured himself a drink, his hands shaking so badly the crystal decanter rattled against the glass. "You are in this too, Ebony," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "Who do you think signed the CO guarantee on the Shell Company loans?" "You did." "Who spent $50,000 a month on clothes and spa treatments while I was trying to juggle the books?" "You did. If I go down, you go down with me. Your medical license will be revoked for financial impropriety. We are in this together." The silence in the room was heavy, suffocating. They were two drowning people realizing they were holding on to each other's ankles. Then Brad's eyes drifted to the newspaper sitting on his desk. It was open to the business section. The headline stared back at them. "Zara King sells truth scan for $80 million. He picked up the paper, his eyes narrowing. $80 million, he muttered. "Cash." Ebony followed his gaze. She sat up straighter, wiping the panic from her face and replacing it with something calculating. "Zara," she said. "She has the money." Brad nodded slowly, the gears in his desperate mind starting to turn. "She has it. And she doesn't know what to do with it. She's a tech geek, Ebony. She wears sneakers to meetings. She lives in a studio apartment. She has no idea how to manage wealth of that magnitude." He walked back to his desk and picked up his phone. The fear was receding, replaced by the arrogance of a predator spotting a wounded animal. "She needs help," he said. "She needs guidance. If that money just sits in a bank account, she will lose half of it to taxes. She needs a tax shelter. She needs a diversified portfolio. She needs a family trust." Ebony stood up, smoothing her skirt. "A family trust," she repeated, testing the words. "Managed by you." "Exactly," Brad said. "If I can get control of her assets, even just a portion of them, I can cover the $5 million hole. I can pay off the investors who are asking questions. I can make the audit go away. And then we can invest the rest properly. We can save her from herself." "Save her from herself." Ebony echoed, a small smile playing on her lips. "She really is helpless with money. Remember when she asked Dad for that loan for her startup? She didn't even have a business plan." "Right," Brad agreed. "She got lucky. One lucky algorithm doesn't make her a genius. It makes her a lottery winner. And lottery winners always go broke because they don't have financial literacy. We have a moral obligation to step in." He unlocked his phone and dialed my father's number. He put it on speaker so Ebony could hear. "Julian," Brad said, his voice shifting instantly into the respectful, authoritative tone he used with my parents. "I am sitting here with Ebony and we are incredibly worried about Zara." My father's voice came through tinny and anxious. "Worried? Why? Is she hurt?" "No, Julian, it is the money," Brad said. $80 million is a dangerous amount of liquid capital for someone with zero financial experience. The sharks are going to circle her. Scam artists, fake charities, bad investments. She could lose it all in a year if she is not careful. I heard my father sigh on the other end. "You are right, Brad, I did not think of that. She has always been so impulsive." "Exactly," Brad continued, winking at Ebony. "Listen, Julian, I have been looking at the tax implications. If she doesn't move that money into a protected vehicle immediately, the IRS is going to take nearly half. I can set up a family preservation trust. It would protect her assets, minimize her tax liability, and ensure the money stays in the King family for generations. But we need to act fast." "What do we need to do?" my father asked. "We need to bring her home," Brad said. "We need to get her to that dinner. You need to tell her that she needs my help. Tell her I am willing to waive my usual management fees because she is family. Tell her I will handle everything so she can go back to her coding. She doesn't want to deal with lawyers and accountants, Julian. She wants to be free. I will call her, my father said. I will make sure she comes. Thank you, Brad. You are always looking out for us. We are family. Julian. Brad said, his voice dripping with false sincerity. That is what we do. He hung up the phone and looked at Ebony. The panic was gone from the room. It was replaced by greed. We have her, he said. She is coming to dinner. Ebony picked up her Hermes bag, running her fingers over the leather. 80 million, she whispered. We could buy the island, Brad. Not just a house on the Hamptons. The island. First we fix the hole, Brad said, pouring another drink. Then we buy the world. Zara won't even know what hit her. She will sign the papers thinking we are doing her a favor. By the time she realizes the money is gone, we will be untouchable. He raised his glass to the empty room. To the prodigal daughter, he said, may she remain as stupid as she is rich. Ebony clinked her imaginary glass against his. To family, she said. They laughed. It was the laugh of people who thought they had just gotten away with murder. They didn't know that 3,000 miles away I was reading the notification on my phone that my forensic software had just flagged a series of suspicious wire transfers from the Sterling Growth Fund. They didn't know that while they were plotting to steal my fortune, I was already printing the evidence of theirs. They thought I was the prey. They had no idea I was the hunter. I sat on the white teak deck of the private villa overlooking the turquoise waters of the Caribbean. The silence was absolute, broken only by the rhythmic lapping of waves against the sugar-white sand. It was the first time in 10 years I had stopped running, stopped working, stopped trying to prove myself to people who refused to see me. But the peace was about to be shattered. I reached for my phone, which had been turned off for 3 days, and pressed the power button. The device vibrated so violently in my hand it felt like a living thing, having a seizure as hundreds of notifications flooded in at once. The digital noise was deafening, but one app stood out immediately. Instagram. My mother, Vivian King, had been busy. I tapped the icon, and there at the top of my feed was a sepia-toned photograph of me at age 5. I was sitting at the grand piano in the drawing room, wearing a white lace dress with a stiff bow in my hair, looking at the camera with wide, innocent eyes. It was a staged photo from a holiday card decades ago. I remembered that day vividly, because 10 minutes after the photo was taken, my mother had scolded me for touching the ivory keys with sticky fingers, telling me I lacked the grace to be a musician like my sister. But the caption today told a very different story. It read, "My beautiful Zara." Even then I saw the spark of genius in her eyes. A mother always knows. So incredibly proud of my baby girl for conquering the tech world and showing everyone what the King legacy is all about. Proud mom, hashtag Tech Titan. Black excellence, hash my heart. I laughed out loud, a harsh sound that startled a seagull perched on the railing. A mother knows. The only thing Vivian King knew was how to spot a photo opportunity. This was the same woman who told me 3 days ago that I was ruining her Persian rug with my failure. The same woman who said my career was a cute hobby. Now that the world knew I was worth $80 million, suddenly I was her genius baby. I scrolled through the comments. They were nauseating. Her entire social circle, the ladies from the Jack and Jill Club, the wealthy matriarchs of the DC elite were all chiming in. You raised her well, Vivian. Excellence runs in the DNA. What a blessing. My mother was liking every single comment, hearting every compliment, curating her image as the supportive matriarch behind the success. She was rewriting history in real time, erasing years of neglect with a single social media post. Then came the voicemail. I saw a notification from my father, Julian. One new voicemail left 2 hours ago. I pressed play and put the phone on speaker, letting his voice drift out over the Caribbean Sea. Zara. His voice was breathless, weak, trembling in a way I had never heard before. It sounded like a performance worthy of a courtroom drama. Zara. I saw the news. My heart. I am having palpitations. The doctor says it is stress, but I know it is just the shock. The joy and the fear all mixed together. We need you home. The family needs to be together at a time like this. I cannot handle this excitement alone. Please come home, daughter. We need to protect you. We need to protect the family name. I stared at the phone. He was not sick. He was terrified. He was using his health as a leash to yank me back into the yard. It was the oldest trick in the King family playbook. If authority did not work, use guilt. If guilt did not work, use fear. He wasn't having heart palpitations because of joy. He was having them because he knew Brad's financial house of cards was about to collapse, and my money was the only thing that could shore it up. They did not want to see me. They wanted to see my bank account. I took a sip of my iced tea, the condensation dripping onto my hand. I waited for the pang of guilt, the familiar urge to rush to my father's side to be the good, dutiful daughter. It never came. Instead, I felt a cold clarity settling over me like a suit of armor. They wanted to protect the legacy. They wanted to protect the money. They thought I was still the desperate little girl who would do anything for a scrap of affection. They had no idea that girl had died the night I threw that trophy in the trash. I closed the Instagram app and opened my contacts. I scrolled past my family and found the number for Darius Vance. He was not just a lawyer, he was a shark in a three-piece suit, a man who terrified corporate boards just by walking into a room. He answered on the first ring. Ms. King. His voice was deep and smooth like expensive scotch. Congratulations on the acquisition. It is the talk of the town. Save it, Darius, I said, cutting him off. I need you in D.C. tomorrow night. 7 p.m. I am going to dinner at my parents' estate, and I need you to bring the full team. Is there a problem? He asked, his tone sharpening, instantly shifting from congratulatory to combat-ready. Not for me, I replied. But there is about to be a very big problem for Brad Sterling. I need the papers drawn up, Darius. The mortgage transfer, the lien on the estate, and the acquisition documents for the debt. Understood, Darius said, without skipping a beat. I will have everything ready. We will meet you at the gate. I hung up and dialed the next number. Chen. He was my head of cybersecurity, a man who could find a digital footprint in a blizzard. He had been running the truth scan algorithm on my family's accounts for the last 72 hours. Tell me you have it, I said. I have everything. Zara. Chen's voice was fast, excited the way he got when he found a particularly nasty bug in the code. It is worse than we thought. The Ponzi scheme is just the tip of the iceberg. I found the shell companies in the Caymans. I found the gambling debts. And Zara, I found the signature on the mortgage documents for your parents' house. It is a forgery. Brad signed your father's name on a second and third mortgage. I felt a dark satisfaction curl in my stomach. So the great Brad Sterling, the financial genius, was nothing but a common thief. Print it, I commanded. Print it all. Every bank statement, every email, every forged signature. I want a physical copy. Bind it in leather, Chen. Make it look like a gift. Consider it done, Chen said. I hung up the phone. I looked out at the ocean one last time. The turquoise water was calm, beautiful, and indifferent. The vacation was over. It was time to go to work. I opened my text messages. My father's thread was at the top, desperate and pleading. I typed a reply, my fingers moving steady and sure. I will be there. Family dinner. 7 p.m. tomorrow. I hit send. Then I smiled. It was the smile of the wolf engaging with the sheep. They wanted a family reunion. I was going to give them a funeral. I stood up and walked back into the villa, leaving the view behind. I had a plane to catch and a brother-in-law to destroy. The tires of the black Bentley crunched softly against the gravel of the circular driveway, a sound that whispered power rather than the desperate screech of my old Honda. I watched the sprawling estate approach through tinted glass. The last time I was here, rain had been lashing against the windshield, and I had been a shivering disappointment begging to be let in. Tonight the sky was clear, and the house was illuminated like a stage set for a play I already knew the ending to. Every window glowed with warm, inviting light, a desperate attempt to project the image of a happy, prosperous home. But I knew better. I looked at the mansion, and I didn't see a home. I saw a liability. I saw a mortgage that hadn't been paid in 3 months. I saw a facade held together by lies and lines of credit that had long since snapped. The car came to a smooth halt right at the foot of the stone steps. My driver, a man named Silas, who looked like he could bench press. The vehicle stepped out and opened my door with a white-gloved hand. I stepped out into the cool evening air. I was not wearing the soaked silk from the awards gala. I was wearing a custom-tailored crimson dress that fit like a second skin, sharp enough to cut and red enough to signal danger. My heels clicked against the stone with a rhythmic authority that echoed in the silence. They were waiting for me. Of course they were. The heavy oak front door swung open before I even reached the top step. My mother Vivian stood there framed by the golden light of the foyer. She was wearing a floor-length gown in royal blue, her hair coiffed into an indestructible helmet of perfection. My father Julian stood beside her in a velvet smoking jacket, trying to look the part of the benevolent patriarch. Behind them, lurking like shadows, were Ebony and Brad. "Zara, baby." My mother cried out, her voice pitching up into a theatrical register of delight. She rushed forward, arms wide open, as if she hadn't looked at me with pure disgust less than a week ago. She enveloped me in a cloud of Chanel No. 5 and desperation. Her embrace was tight, too tight. It felt less like a hug and more like she was trying to absorb my net worth through osmosis. "Look at you," she gushed, pulling back to examine me, her eyes scanning my dress, my jewelry, my face, not for signs of health, but for signs of wealth. "You look magnificent. Absolutely stunning." "I always said red was your color, didn't I, Julian?" I stood stiffly in her grasp, my arms at my sides. "Actually, Mother," I said, my voice cool and even. "You always told me red was too bold for someone with my complexion. You said I should stick to beige so I wouldn't draw attention to myself." Her smile faltered for a fraction of a second, a tiny crack in the porcelain before she plastered it back on. "Oh, nonsense. You must be remembering wrong. I have always known you were meant to stand out. Come inside. Come inside. The neighbors are watching." She ushered me into the foyer. The house smelled the same, a mix of expensive lilies and lemon polish. But now that I knew the truth, the scent cloyed in my throat. It smelled like decay masked by perfume. I walked past the spot on the marble floor where I had dripped rainwater, and I saw my father eyeing the floor nervously, as if expecting me to stain it again. "Welcome home, daughter," my father said, stepping forward to place a heavy hand on my shoulder. He squeezed it, a gesture meant to convey fatherly pride, but it felt heavy, possessive. "We are so glad you came to your senses and came home. We have so much to discuss. The family legacy is expanding, and we need to make sure we are all moving in the same direction." I looked at him, at the lines of stress etched around his eyes that no amount of Botox could hide. He wasn't looking at his daughter, he was looking at a bailout. "It is good to see you, father," I said, stepping out from under his hand. "I wouldn't miss this for the world." We moved into the formal dining room. The table was set for 5, but it looked different than usual. They had brought out the good china, the stuff usually reserved for senators and visiting dignitaries. The centerpiece was a massive overflow of orchids. "We wanted tonight to be special," Ebony said, walking up beside me. She linked her arm through mine, a gesture of intimacy we hadn't shared since we were toddlers. She was wearing emerald green and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "We wanted to celebrate you properly. No dogs tonight, just us." She laughed, a brittle sound. I looked down at her arm, hooked through mine, and gently extricated myself. "That is so thoughtful, Ebony," I said. "We had cook prepare your absolute favorite meal," my mother announced, clapping her hands together as we took our seats. I sat at my usual spot on the side, but my father gestured frantically. "No, no, Zara. You sit at the head of the table tonight." Opposite me. I raised an eyebrow but moved to the head of the table, the seat of honor, the seat usually reserved for Brad or distinguished guests. I sat down, and the servers brought out the first course. It was lobster bisque. I stared down at the creamy pink soup, the chunks of lobster meat glistening under the chandelier light. The smell wafted up rich and heavy. "Oh, Zara, look!" My mother beamed. "Lobster bisque. We know how much you love it." I looked up at them, looked up at Sa. My mother was smiling expectantly. My father was nodding. Ebony was already reaching for her spoon. "I haven't eaten shellfish in 15 years, Mother," I said quietly. "I developed an allergy in college. You visited me in the hospital when I went into anaphylactic shock. Remember, you complained about the cafeteria coffee the whole time." The room went dead silent. The only sound was the clinking of Brad's spoon against his bowl as he froze mid-motion. My mother's smile began to tremble. "Oh," she stammered. I must have confused you with Ebony," I finished for her. "Ebony loves lobster bisque. It is her favorite meal. You made Ebony's favorite meal for my celebration dinner." Ebony flushed pink, matching the soup. "Well," she said, her voice shrill, "it is a delicacy, Zara. Most people would be grateful. And allergies can change. Maybe you grew out of it." I pushed the bowl away from me a few inches. The porcelain scraped loudly against the table. "I did not grow out of it, Ebony. Just like I didn't grow out of my memory." Brad cleared his throat loudly, desperate to bridge the awkward chasm opening up in the middle of the dinner. He stood up, grabbing a bottle of wine from the silver bucket. It was a Chateau Margaux vintage. He walked around the table to my side, his movements a little too quick, a little too eager. "Let us not worry about the soup," he said, his voice booming with forced joviality. "We are here to drink to the woman of the hour." He poured a generous amount of the dark red wine into my crystal goblet. The liquid swirled, catching the light. He filled his own glass and raised it high, signaling for everyone else to do the same. "To Zara," he announced, looking down at me with a smile that was equal parts envy and calculation. "You finally did it, kid. You finally stepped up. We were worried for a while there with all that computer nonsense, but $80 million, that is real money. That is respect." He leaned in closer, the smell of his expensive cologne mixing with the scent of the wine. "Welcome to the club, Zara. Welcome to the big leagues. Now you are finally on our level. Now you are finally one of us." He clinked his glass against mine, a sharp ringing sound that hung in the air. He stood there, waiting for me to pick up my glass, waiting for me to drink the Kool-Aid, waiting for me to accept his validation as the prize I had been seeking my whole life. I looked at the wine. I looked at Brad's sweating face. I looked at my parents watching me with hungry eyes. They thought this was the moment. They thought they had me. They thought that by acknowledging my money, they were acknowledging me. I did not reach for the glass. I placed my hands flat on the table on either side of the plate. I couldn't eat. I looked Brad dead in the eye. "Your level?" I asked, my voice soft, but carrying to every corner of the silent room. I let the question hang there. I didn't drink. I didn't smile. I just sat there, the queen in her red armor, watching the jester dance. "Sit down, Brad," I said. "We have work to do." The servers cleared away the untouched lobster bisque in a silence so thick it felt like a physical weight pressing down on the table. My mother Vivian dabbed at her lips with a linen napkin, her eyes darting around the room as if searching for a script she had lost. She tried to fill the void with chatter about the weather in Paris, asking if I had visited the Louvre or shopped on the Champs-Élysées. I gave her monosyllabic answers, allowing her questions to die in the air. I was not there to discuss art or fashion. I was there to watch them squirm. The main course arrived. Rack of lamb with a mint reduction, my father's favorite. The smell of roasted meat filled the room, grounding the surreal atmosphere in something primal. My father, Julian King, cleared his throat. It was a sound that used to make me freeze as a child, the signal that court was in session, and a verdict was about to be delivered. He placed his knife and fork down with deliberate precision and looked at me across the floral centerpiece. "Zara, He began, his voice taking on the deep, resonant tone he used when he wanted to sound benevolent. We have not been the best at communicating lately. I will admit that. We have been distant. But money changes things. It changes people. It changes how the world sees you, and more importantly, it changes how vulnerable you are. He paused, letting the word vulnerable hang in the air like a threat. We built the King name on stability, he continued. On prudence. On legacy. Your grandfather worked himself to the bone to give us a foothold in this society. I spent 40 years on the bench ensuring our reputation was spotless. And now you have come into a significant fortune. $80 million is a life-changing amount, Zara. But it is also a dangerous amount. It attracts wolves. It attracts charlatans. It attracts people who want to strip you bare and leave you with nothing. I cut a piece of lamb, my movements slow and deliberate. I am aware of the risks, Father, I said without looking up. I run a fraud detection company. Spotting wolves is literally my job. Brad laughed, a short, nervous bark. That is software, Zara. That is code running on a server. Real-world finance is different. Wall Street is a different beast entirely. It is not about binary code. It is about relationships. It is about leverage. It is about knowing where the bodies are buried and how to keep them there. My father nodded at Brad, giving him the floor. Brad reached under his chair and pulled out a thick, leather-bound portfolio. He placed it on the table with a heavy thud. It looked like a tombstone. He slid it across the mahogany surface, pushing aside the crystal salt shakers and the antique candle holders until it rested right next to my plate. We have been up all night working on this, Zara, Brad said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Because we love you. Because we are family. I called in favors from my best tax attorneys. I had my top analysts run the projections. This is the solution to all your problems. I looked down at the document. The cover was embossed with gold lettering. The King Family Preservation Trust. Open it, Brad urged. I flipped open the heavy cover. The pages were thick, cream-colored, covered in dense legal jargon. Here is the structure, Brad explained, his hands moving animatedly. We consolidate your assets, the $80 million from the sale plus any future earnings. We move it all into this trust. It shields you from liability. It minimizes your tax burden by routing the funds through a series of offshore entities I have already established. And the best part is the management. He leaned back in his chair, a smug smile playing on his lips. I am going to manage it for you, Zara. Normally, Sterling Growth charges a 2% management fee and takes 20% of the profits. That is the industry standard. But for you, I am waiving the fees, 0%. I will handle the investments, the diversification, the legal compliance. You will not have to lift a finger. You can go back to your computers or travel the world or do whatever it is you do. You will receive a monthly allowance, generous of course, and the principal will remain untouched, growing safely under my watch. A monthly allowance. I stared at the words on the page. Irrevocable power of attorney. Sole trustee. Bradley Sterling. So I sign this and you control everything? I asked, my voice flat. Brad chuckled, shaking his head as if I had made a cute joke. I do not control it, Zara. I steward it. I protect it. You are the beneficiary. I am just the guardian. You have to understand that wealth like this is a burden. It is stressful. You do not want to be waking up at 3 in the morning worrying about the Asian markets or the bond yield curves. Let me carry that weight for you. My sister Ebony chimed in, her voice dripping with faux concern. She reached across the table and patted my hand. Listen to him, Zara. Brad is a genius with this stuff. You know how you get. You get overwhelmed. You get anxious. You are an artist, really. Code is art, isn't it? You are creative. You are emotional. You are not built for the cold, hard world of finance. She took a sip of wine and continued, her eyes wide and earnest. Remember when you tried to do your own taxes in college and you cried for 2 days? You are just not good with numbers, Zara. Not real numbers. Leave the money to the men. Let Brad take care of you. It is what he does best. I looked at my father. He was nodding in agreement. It is for your own good, Zara, he said. We want to make sure you are set for life. If you try to manage this yourself, you will make mistakes. You will lose it. And then where will you be? We cannot bail you out. This is your one chance to secure your future. Sign the papers, daughter. Trust your family. Brad pulled a pen from his breast pocket. It was a Mont Blanc heavy and black with a gold tip. He uncapped it with a flourish and set it down on top of the document. Just right there on the bottom line, he said, pointing to a sticky note marked with an X. One signature and you are free. One signature and you never have to worry about money again. I looked at the pen. I looked at the document that would legally hand over every cent I had earned to a man who was currently sweating through his dress shirt. I looked at their faces. My mother looked hopeful, her eyes fixated on the pen. My father looked stern, expecting obedience. Ebony looked bored, ready for this business to be over so she could go back to talking about herself. And Brad looked hungry. He looked like a starving man staring at a feast. They truly believed I was stupid. They believed that because I didn't wear Chanel or drive a Porsche, I was naive. They believed that because I had spent my life seeking their approval, I would sign my life away just to get a pat on the head. They didn't know that my algorithm had already flagged the Sterling Growth Fund as a high-risk insolvency case. They didn't know that I knew about the $5 million hole he was trying to plug with my money. I reached out and picked up the pen. It felt cool and heavy in my hand. The room went silent. The air was sucked out of the space. Brad stopped breathing. He leaned forward, his eyes locked on the tip of the pen. My mother clasped her hands together in prayer. Even the servers seemed to freeze in the shadows. I twirled the pen between my fingers slowly, over and over. The gold caught the light from the chandelier. 0% fees, I said softly, still staring at the pen. That is very generous, Brad. Most hedge fund managers would kill for a liquidity injection of $80 million. They would usually offer better terms than just zero fees. They would offer board seats. They would offer transparency. Brad laughed nervously, a bead of sweat rolling down his temple. We can discuss a board seat if that makes you feel important, Zara. But really, the zero-fee structure is a gift. It is charity. Charity, I repeated. I stopped twirling the pen. I held it poised over the paper. Everyone leaned in. The moment stretched tight as a piano wire. I looked up. I looked straight at Brad. And then I smiled. I did not sign the paper. Instead, I tapped the gold tip of the Mont Blanc pen against the mahogany table. The rhythmic, clicking sound was the only noise in the room, a metronome counting down the seconds of Brad Sterling's career. Click, click, click. I watched the bead of sweat on his temple finally lose its battle against gravity and roll down into the collar of his starch-white shirt. Brad. I said, my voice conversational and light, as if we were discussing the weather rather than the custody of $80 million. Before we move forward with the transfer, I have a few mundane questions about the portfolio strategy. You mentioned the Sterling Growth Fund has been outperforming the S&P 500 for 12 consecutive quarters. That is a remarkable track record, truly statistical anomaly territory. Brad smiled, but it looked painful, like his face was made of wax that was beginning to melt near a fire. Well, Zara, we have a proprietary trading algorithm. It allows us to leverage high-frequency trading to capitalize on micro-trends. It is very technical. I would not want to bore you with the calculus. I stopped tapping the pen. I leaned forward, resting my chin on my hand, looking at him with wide, innocent eyes. Bore me, Brad. Please, I love calculus. In fact, I built my entire company on it. So tell me, what is the current Sharpe ratio of the fund? And more importantly, what is your liquidity coverage ratio for the proposed trust? If I needed to withdraw, say, $10 million next week for a new venture, what is the lockup period? The color drained from his face. He reached for his wine glass and took a gulp that was too large for polite company. He set the glass down hard enough that wine sloshed over the rim, staining the white tablecloth red. Liquidity, he stammered. Well, obviously, with a preservation trust, we structure it for long-term growth. We do not want to be moving capital in and out constantly. That disrupts the compound interest. The lockup period is standard, 3 years. But of course, if there was an emergency as the trustee, I could authorize a disbursement. 3 years, I repeated. So I hand you $80 million today, and I cannot touch a cent of the principal until I am 35. And in the meantime, you are investing it in what exactly? What is the asset allocation? Are we talking blue chip stocks, emerging markets, or something more opaque? Perhaps real estate derivatives, or maybe unsecured loans to shell companies in the Cayman Islands. Brad choked on his wine. He started coughing violently, grabbing his napkin to cover his mouth. My sister Ebony rubbed his back, her eyes darting between her husband and me with growing alarm. Zara, why are you grilling him? Ebony snapped. He is doing you a favor. You are acting like this is a deposition. It is a family dinner. It is a business transaction. Ebony, I said without looking at her, my eyes fixed on Brad. And a very large one. Brad, you still have not answered my question. What is the asset allocation? And while you are at it, who is the third-party custodian for the funds? Surely you do not hold the assets yourself. That would be a conflict of interest. That would be exactly how Bernie Madoff operated. Brad slammed his hand down on the table. The silverware rattled. That is enough, he shouted, his face flushing a deep, angry crimson. How dare you? I am a respected professional. I manage money for some of the most powerful families in Washington. I do not need to be audited by my own sister-in-law over a rack of lamb. You are clearly emotional, Zara. You are overwhelmed by the money, and you are lashing out because you are scared. You do not understand how high finance works. It is about trust. It is about relationships. It is not about ratios and custodians. I laughed. It was a cold, dry sound. Trust, I said. Trust but verify. That is the first rule of security, Brad. And frankly, your answers are terrifying. You are using buzzwords to cover up the fact that you have no strategy. You cannot tell me your liquidity ratio because you have no liquidity. You cannot name a custodian because there isn't one. You are asking for full control with zero oversight. In the tech world, we call that a black box. And usually when you open a black box, you find a bomb. My father, Julian, stood up. He knocked his chair over in his haste. He loomed over the table, his judge's glare fixed on me. His chest was heaving, his earlier feigned frailty forgotten in his rage. Stop this immediately, Zara, he bellowed. You are insulting this family. You are insulting your brother-in-law. Brad is a Wall Street expert. He has kept this family afloat with his investments. He has doubled our portfolio in 5 years. Who are you to question him? You are a girl who got lucky with a computer program. You are not a financier. You are not a banker. You are a guest in this house, and you will show some respect. I stood up too. I was not as tall as him, but in my heels and my red dress, I felt 10 feet tall. I did not flinch. I did not look down. He has not doubled your portfolio, Dad, I said, my voice slicing through his shouting. He has churned it. Do you even know what that means? He buys and sells stocks uselessly just to generate commission fees for himself. And that is the best case scenario. The worst case is that the statements he sends you every month are printed on a laser jet in his office and have no basis in reality. Lies. My father screamed, his face turning purple. Brad, show her the returns, put her in her place. We all looked at Brad. He was sitting slumped in his chair. He was not reaching for his phone to show the returns. He was not pulling out a ledger. He was wiping his forehead with a napkin that was already soaked through with sweat. He looked small. He looked cornered. I cannot show her right now, Brad muttered. His eyes fixed on his plate. The servers are down for maintenance. It is the weekend. The portal is closed. The portal is closed, I repeated incredulously. Brad, it is 2024. Banking portals do not close for the weekend. This is not a Chick-fil-A. I picked up the heavy legal document he had tried to make me sign. I held it up to the light. You know what I see when I read this, Brad. I see a man who is drowning. I see a man who needs $5 million by Friday to pay off investors who are asking for their money back. I see a man who is terrified of the SEC audit that is scheduled for next week. Ebony gasped. She covered her mouth with her hand. How did you know about the audit? She whispered before she could stop herself. Brad whipped his head around, looking at his wife with pure hatred. Shut up, Ebony, he hissed. I dropped the document back onto the table. It landed with a thud that sounded like a gavel. I know because I did my homework, I said. I know because TruthScan isn't just a fraud detection tool for banks. It is a forensic auditing system. And before I came here tonight, I ran a full diagnostic on you, Brad. I ran it on Sterling Growth. I ran it on your personal accounts. I ran it on the shell companies in the Caymans that you thought were hidden. My mother, Vivian, finally spoke. Her voice was trembling, small and frightened. Zara, what are you saying? I am saying, Mom, that your son-in-law is not a genius. He is not a Wall Street expert. He is a fraud. He has been stealing from you for years. He has leveraged this house 3 times. He has drained your retirement accounts. And he was planning to use my $80 million to plug the hole before the FBI found out. My father looked at Brad. He looked at the man he had praised for years, the man he had wished was his own son. He looked for a denial. He looked for righteous indignation. Brad, say something, my father whispered. Tell her she is crazy. Brad said nothing. He just stared at the tablecloth, his hands shaking uncontrollably. He cannot say anything, Dad, I said, because he knows I have the receipts. I looked at my father, my mother, and my sister. They looked like statues frozen in a moment of absolute horror. The illusion was shattering around them. The perfect family, the perfect life, the perfect legacy, it was all dissolving into smoke. You asked why I dared to question him, Dad. I said, my voice hard as diamonds. You asked why I dared to doubt the expert. I leaned over the table, getting right in Brad's face. He is not an expert, Dad. He is a gambler. And he just bet the house and lost. I have heard enough of this insanity, Brad shouted, pushing his chair back so violently that it tipped over and crashed onto the marble floor. The sound echoed like a gunshot in the silent dining room, causing my mother to jump and spill her wine. Brad stood there, chest heaving, his face a mask of righteous indignation that was slipping to reveal the sheer terror underneath. He adjusted his cufflinks with trembling hands, trying to summon the arrogance that had carried him through life so far. You are clearly having a mental breakdown, Zara, he spat out, his eyes darting toward the exit. The money has gone to your head, and you are paranoid. I will not sit here and be insulted by an amateur who thinks she understands high finance because she wrote a few lines of code. I am leaving. And Julian, I suggest you get your daughter a psychiatrist before she embarrasses this family any further. He turned on his heel and marched toward the double doors of the dining room, his footsteps heavy and fast. My father looked from Brad to me, his expression torn between his habitual loyalty to the golden boy and the gnawing realization that I might be telling the truth. Brad, wait, my father called out, half rising from his seat. But I did not move. I did not chase him. I simply raised my hand and snapped my fingers. The double doors swung open before Brad could reach them. He stopped dead in his tracks, nearly colliding with the 2 men who blocked his path. Step aside, Brad snarled, trying to push past them. The first man did not budge. It was Darius Vance, my lawyer. He stood 6 feet 4 inches tall, in a bespoke suit that cost more than Brad's car. He looked down at my brother-in-law with the dispassionate gaze of a predator who has just spotted lunch. Beside him stood Chen, my head of cybersecurity, holding a ruggedized laptop and wearing a tactical vest under his blazer. They were not there for dinner. They were there for a demolition. Mr. Sterling Darius said, his voice deep and resonant, filling the room. I would advise you to return to your seat, unless you would prefer to have this conversation with the federal agents currently parked at the end of the driveway. Brad stumbled back, his face draining of all color. He looked at me, his eyes wide with betrayal. You called the police? I called my team, I said calmly, gesturing to the empty chair. Sit down, Brad. We are just getting started. Brad retreated to the table, walking like a man marching to the gallows. He righted his chair and sat down, shrinking into himself. My sister Ebony reached for his hand, but he pulled away, staring blankly at the centerpiece. My mother began to weep softly. Zara, what is happening? Who are these men? Why are you doing this to us? I stood up slowly, smoothing the silk of my red dress. I walked to the head of the table where I had been sitting and looked down at them. My family, the people who had dismissed me, ignored me, and underestimated me for 32 years. You asked me what my company does, Dad, I said, looking directly at my father. You called it a hobby. You called it a little app thing. You thought Global Crest Bank paid $80 million for a video game. I began to pace slowly around the table, my heels clicking rhythmically on the floor. TruthScan is not a game. It is an artificial intelligence engine designed for one specific purpose: forensic auditing. It does not just look at bank statements. It crawls through the digital bedrock of financial systems. It analyzes millions of transactions per second, looking for patterns that human auditors miss. It finds the ghost transactions. It finds the shell companies hidden 3 layers deep in tax havens. It finds the money that people think they have washed clean. I stopped behind my mother's chair, resting my hands on the back of it. She flinched but did not look up. When the bank acquired my technology, they did not buy it to help people save money on their taxes. They bought it to hunt down fraud. They bought it to catch the kind of white-collar criminals who hide behind expensive suits and country club memberships. It is a weapon, Dad, and I built it. My father was staring at me as if seeing me for the first time. The disdain was gone, replaced by a dawning horror. Before I came here tonight, I decided I needed to run a final beta test. I continued walking over to Darius. He handed me a thick, heavy folder. It was bound in red leather, the color of a warning signal. I needed a complex data set. I needed a network of accounts that were tangled enough to challenge the algorithm, but accessible enough for me to verify. I needed to test it on people I knew. I walked back to the table, holding the folder against my chest. So I inputted your social security numbers. Ebony let out a strangled gasp. You cannot do that. That is illegal. I ignored her. I inputted your bank account numbers, the trust fund data you sent me years ago, the mortgage information that is public record, and then I let TruthScan do what it was born to do. I let it dig. I stood directly across from Brad. He was refusing to look at the folder in my arms. He was staring at his water glass, watching the condensation slide down the side. I thought I would find some mismanagement. I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that carried more weight than a scream. I thought I would find maybe some aggressive tax loopholes, maybe some credit card debt you were hiding. I expected mediocrity, Brad, because that is what you are, mediocre. I slammed the red folder down onto the center of the table. The plates jumped, the wine glasses chimed. But I did not find mediocrity. I found a crime scene. I placed my hand on the cover of the dossier. This is the result of a 10-year forensic audit on the King and Sterling families. It details every wire transfer, every offshore account, every forged document, and every single lie you have told since the day you married my sister. Open it, Brad, I commanded. He did not move. Open it! I shouted, my voice cracking like a whip. My father reached out his hand, shaking violently, and flipped open the cover of the dossier. The first page was a summary graph, a red line plummeting straight down into the abyss. What is this? My father whispered. That is your net worth, Dad, I said. Or rather, what is left of it. Because according to my software, the man sitting next to you has not just lost his own money, he has lost yours. He has lost Ebony's, and he was about to lose mine. I pointed at the thick stack of papers. It is all there. The transfers from your retirement account to cover his margin calls. The second mortgage on this house that you supposedly paid off 5 years ago. The third mortgage that Brad took out last month by forging your signature digitally. My mother screamed a short, sharp sound of pure agony. My house, she wailed. Your house belongs to the bank, Mom, I said, and the bank was about to foreclose on it next Tuesday. That is why Brad needed my signature tonight. That is why he waived the fees. He did not want to manage my money. He wanted to use it to pay off the sharks before they took the keys to the mansion. I looked at Brad. He was weeping now, silent tears running down his face, ruining his perfect tan. You thought I was the fool, I said. You thought the girl who liked computers was too stupid to read a balance sheet. But you forgot one thing, Brad. I wrote the code that catches people like you. I leaned in close. You are not an investor. You are a parasite. And I just turned on the lights. The silence in the dining room was replaced by the frantic rustling of paper as my father turned the pages of the dossier, his hands shaking so violently that he nearly ripped the high-quality bond paper. My mother leaned over his shoulder, her eyes scanning the columns of red numbers, her breath hitching in her throat like a trapped bird. Ebony sat frozen, staring at the copy Darius had placed in front of her, looking as though she was trying to read a foreign language she had never studied. I stood at the head of the table conducting the symphony of their destruction. I did not need to look at the papers. I had memorized every line of code, every illicit transfer, every lie. Turn to page 4. Dad, I said, my voice cutting through the room like a scalpel. Look at the column marked Sterling Growth Fund Assets Under Management. You see that number? My father squinted, his face gray. It says 0, he whispered. But that cannot be right. Brad sends me statements every month. Last month, the statement said the fund had $50 million in assets. I walked over to the sideboard and poured myself a glass of water. Those statements are fiction, Dad. They are creative writing projects printed on high-gloss paper. Brad has been running a classic Ponzi scheme for 5 years. He takes money from new investors like his friends at the country club, and he uses it to pay dividends to the old investors to keep them quiet. He skims 15% off the top for management fees and another 10% for expenses. But the music stopped 6 months ago. The new investors stopped coming. The fund is empty. It is a ghost town. Brad made a noise in his throat, a strangled whimper like a kicked dog, but he did not speak. He was staring at the table, his eyes glazed over. Keep reading, I commanded. Page 10. Look at the transfers from the joint family accounts. You see those dates. March 12th, April 4th, May 2nd. Each one is a transfer of $200,000. My mother gasped, clutching her pearls. That was for the renovation, she said, her voice trembling. Brad said we needed to move the cash to a high-yield holding account before we paid the contractors. He said it was for tax efficiency. It was not for taxes, Mom, I said. It was for margin calls. Brad made bad bets on volatile tech stocks, trying to win back the money he had already stolen. He lost it all. Every cent of that renovation money is gone, vaporized. But the worst part is on page 15, I said, walking closer to my father. This is the part that is going to hurt, Dad. This is the part that proves he did not just make mistakes. He preyed on you. My father turned the page. He stared at the document for a long time. It was a copy of a deed of trust, a mortgage document. I do not understand, he said, his voice sounding thin and old. This is a mortgage on the estate, but I paid off this house 20 years ago. We own it free and clear. I have the deed in my safe. I shook my head slowly. You have a piece of paper in your safe, Dad. But down at the county recorder's office, this house is leveraged to the hilt. Brad took out a $5 million loan against this property 6 months ago. What my father shouted, standing up so fast his chair skidded backward. He looked at Brad, his eyes bulging. You mortgaged my house. You mortgaged the King estate. How is that possible? I never signed anything. I reached over and tapped the bottom of the page. Look at the signature, Dad. He looked. There it was. Julian King. in blue ink, slanted just the way he signed it, but there was a slight tremor in the loop of the J, a hesitation in the cross of the K. It is a digital forgery, I explained. He lifted your signature from the power of attorney documents you signed last year for the trust. He pasted it onto the mortgage application. He notarized it himself using his license. He stole your home, Dad. And he did not use the money to invest. He did not use it to save the fund. I turned to Brad, who was now rocking back and forth slightly in his chair. Tell them where the $5 million went, Brad. Tell them about the crypto casinos. Ebony looked up from her trance. Casinos, she whispered. Your husband is a gambling addict, Ebony, I said. He lost $3 million playing online poker and high-stakes crypto betting in a span of 4 weeks. The other $2 million went to pay off bookies in Atlantic City who were threatening to break his legs. He did not mortgage this house to save the business. He mortgaged it to save his kneecaps. My father grabbed his chest. He let out a groan that sounded like a tree snapping in a storm. He swayed on his feet, his face turning a terrifying shade of ashen gray. My house, he gasped. My legacy. You stole my legacy. He lunged across the table. It was a clumsy, desperate movement. He wanted to grab Brad. He wanted to strangle the man he had treated like a son. But he was 70 years old, and his heart was breaking. He stumbled, knocking over a candelabra. Julie and my mother screamed, rushing to catch him. Brad saw his opening. The chaos, the distraction, the old man falling. He saw the red folder lying on the table, the evidence of his crimes, the paper trail that would send him to prison for 20 years. A feral sound tore from Brad's throat. It was not a word, it was a roar of pure panic. He jumped up from his chair, knocking it backward into the server, who dropped a tray of silver. Brad dove for the table, his hands outstretched, clawing for the dossier. Give me that! He shrieked, his eyes wild and bloodshot. You cannot have it! It is mine! He grabbed the leather binder, clutching it to his chest, as if it could save him. He turned to run, his eyes darting toward the French doors that led to the garden. He took one step. Chen, my head of cybersecurity, moved with a speed that defied his size. He had been standing silently in the shadows, a statue in a suit, but now he was a blur of motion. He stepped into Brad's path. He did not shout. He did not pull a weapon. He simply extended one leg in a perfect tactical sweep and drove his shoulder into Brad's chest. Brad hit the floor with a bone-jarring thud. The breath left his body in a whoosh. The red folder flew from his hands, sliding across the marble floor until it came to rest at my feet. Chen was on him in a second. He twisted Brad's arm behind his back and pinned him to the ground, his knee pressing into Brad's spine. Brad thrashed and kicked, screaming obscenities, slobbering on the expensive rug. Get off me! Brad yelled, his voice muffled by the floor. Do you know who I am? I am Bradley Sterling. I will sue you. I will ruin you. I walked over to where he lay pinned like a butterfly in a display case. I picked up the red folder and dusted it off. I looked down at him. His face was pressed against the wool, his expensive suit bunched up around his shoulders, his dignity gone. You are nobody, Brad, I said calmly. You are a number in a federal indictment, and you are trespassing in my house. My house, Brad spat, trying to lift his head. This is Julian's house. I looked over at my father, who was sitting on the sofa clutching his chest while my mother fanned him with a linen napkin. I walked over to the sideboard and picked up another document. A single sheet of paper with a bank seal on it. Actually, I said, turning back to Brad. That is the last thing I need to tell you. When I saw the foreclosure notice in the system this morning, I called the bank. I happen to have a very good relationship with Global Crest now, seeing as they just paid me $80 million. I bought the debt, Brad. I bought the bad loan you took out in my father's name. I held up the paper. I own the mortgage now, which means I own this house. And unlike my father, I have zero tolerance for thieves. The room went silent again. The only sound was Brad's heavy breathing and my father's weak gasps. Get him up, Chen, I said. Chen hauled Brad to his feet. Brad hung there limp and defeated, his resistance broken by the weight of the truth. I looked at my family. The dinner was ruined. The illusion was destroyed. The King family legacy was nothing but ash and debt, and I was the only one holding the broom. Brad Sterling was still wheezing on the floor, held down by the knee of my security chief, but the energy in the room had shifted. The physical threat was neutralized. Now it was time for the emotional demolition. I turned my back on the man who had tried to rob me and looked at the woman who had stood by and watched him rob our parents. My sister Ebony was sitting at the dining table, her hands gripping the edge so tightly her knuckles were white. She was staring at a spot on the wall, refusing to look at her husband on the floor, or her father clutching his chest on the sofa. She looked like a porcelain doll that had been dropped, cracking invisibly under the glaze. "You knew," I said, my voice quiet, but carrying in the silent room. I walked toward her, my heels clicking on the marble, a slow, rhythmic sound that made her flinch with every step. "You knew everything, didn't you, Ebony?" She shook her head rapidly, a jerk of denial that looked more like a spasm. "No," she whispered. "No, Brad told me investments were just down. He said it was a market correction. I didn't know about the fraud. I didn't know about the shell companies." "Stop lying," I snapped. I reached into the red dossier that I had recovered from the floor and pulled out a stack of emails. I threw them onto the table in front of her. They slid across the polished wood, stopping just inches from her trembling hands. "These are emails from you to Brad," I said. "Dated 2 years ago. Subject line, liquidity crisis. In these emails you are not asking about market corrections. You are asking him how to hide the transfer of funds from the joint account. You are suggesting he used Dad's social security number to open a new line of credit because your credit score had tanked. You didn't just know Ebony, you were the co-conspirator." My father let out a sound that was half sob, half gasp. He looked at his favorite daughter, his golden child, with eyes wide with betrayal. "Ebony," he rasped. "Tell me it isn't true. Tell me you didn't help him steal my identity." Ebony finally looked up. Her mascara was running, tracking black tears down her perfect face. Her composure shattered completely. "I had to. Dad," she screamed, her voice shrill and desperate. "We were going to lose everything. The club membership, the cars, the status. Do you know what it is like to walk into a room and wonder if your credit card will be declined? Do you know the shame of pretending to be rich when you are drowning? I couldn't let us be failures. I couldn't be like Zara." The insult hung in the air, but it didn't sting anymore. It just proved how deep the rot went. She had destroyed her family's financial future just to avoid looking like me. "You sacrificed our parents for a country club membership," I asked, my voice dripping with disgust. "You let Brad leverage this house until there was no equity left." But that wasn't enough, was it? When the banks stopped lending to Brad, you had to find money somewhere else. I turned to my mother, Vivian. She was still fanning my father, trying to keep him calm, but her eyes were fixed on me, terrified of what I was going to say next. She was wearing her favorite necklace, a heavy diamond choker that had belonged to her grandmother. It was the pride of the King family heirlooms, the symbol of our old money status. She wore it to every gala, every wedding, every important dinner. "Mom," I said, walking over to her, "that is a beautiful necklace." She touched the stones instinctively, her hand trembling. "It is the family legacy, Zara, you know that. Your great-grandmother wore this. I wore it at my wedding. Ebony wore it at hers." "Yes," I said. "Ebony wore it. And she borrowed it a lot, didn't she? For galas, for charity events. She was always borrowing your jewelry." My mother frowned, confused. "Yes, she likes vintage pieces. What does that have to do with anything?" I looked at Ebony. She had buried her face in her hands. She was shaking, her shoulders heaving. "Tell her, Ebony," I commanded. "Tell Mom what you did to the legacy." Ebony didn't speak. She just sobbed harder. "Fine," I said. "I will tell her." "Mom, take off the necklace." My mother recoiled, clutching her throat. "Why?" "I will not." "Take it off, Mom, and look at the clasp. Look at the hallmark on the back of the setting." My mother hesitated, looking from me to Ebony's sobbing form. Slowly, with shaking fingers, she undid the clasp. She pulled the heavy piece from her neck and held it up to the light of the chandelier. She squinted, looking for the tiny engraving of the jeweler's mark that had been there for 80 years. "It is gone," she whispered. "The mark is gone." "It is gone because that is not your grandmother's necklace," I said brutally. "That is a high-quality replica made of cubic zirconia and rhodium-plated silver. It is worth maybe $200 on a good day." My mother gasped, dropping the necklace into her lap as if it were a snake. "Ebony swapped it 6 months ago." I explained, my voice cold and clinical. "She took the original to a pawn shop in Baltimore because she couldn't show her face in D.C. She sold a $50,000 heirloom for $8,000 cash, just to pay off the interest on Brad's gambling debts for 1 month. My mother let out a scream that didn't sound human. It was a primal wail of pure anguish. She grabbed the fake necklace and threw it across the room. It hit the wall and shattered, scattering fake diamonds across the floor like cheap confetti. "My diamonds!" she shrieked, clawing at her chest. "You stole my diamonds! You stole my mother's diamonds!" It wasn't just the necklace, I continued, relentless. The sapphire earrings, the tennis bracelet, the vintage Rolex Dad keeps in the safe, all of them. Gone. Swapped out for fakes while you were sleeping, or while you trusted her with the keys to the safe. Your daughter didn't just stand by and watch Brad rob you, she was the one who unlocked the door. Ebony looked up, her face a mask of ruined vanity. "I was going to buy them back," she wailed. "Once the fund recovered, once Brad hit it big, I was going to buy them back before you noticed. It was a loan. It was just a loan. It was theft." I roared, losing my calm for the first time. "You stole from your own mother to fund a criminal enterprise. You looked them in the eye every Sunday for dinner, knowing you were picking their pockets. You sat there tonight eating lamb and drinking wine, knowing that this house was days away from foreclosure, and you said nothing. You were going to let me sign my life away just to cover your tracks." I looked at my parents. They were broken. My father was slumped against the cushions, looking 10 years older than he had an hour ago. My mother was weeping, rocking back and forth on the sofa, mourning her jewelry more than her relationship with her daughter. They had spent their lives worshipping the image of perfection, and now they were sitting in the ruins of it. "You wanted to talk about the future, Dad," I said, turning back to my father. "You called this meeting to discuss my future. But we need to talk about yours. Because as of this morning, you don't have one. Not in this house, anyway." My father looked up, his eyes hazy. "What do you mean?" I walked over to the table where the red dossier still lay open. I flipped to the very last page. It was a legal document stamped with the seal of Global Crest Bank. "When my algorithm flagged the foreclosure notice on this property, I made a call," I said. "The bank was preparing to auction this estate next Tuesday. They were going to put a sign on the lawn. They were going to list it in the paper. The neighbors would have known everything. The King family evicted." My mother whimpered, her hands covering her face. "I couldn't let that happen," I said. "Not because I care about your reputation, but because I care about my name." So I made a deal. I bought the debt. I picked up the document and held it up for them to see. I bought the mortgage, Dad. I bought the bad loans Brad took out. I bought the liens. I paid off the bank this morning." Relief washed over my father's face. He tried to sit up, a glimmer of his old arrogance returning. "Oh, Zara, thank God. You saved the house. You saved us. I knew you would do the right thing. We will pay you back, of course. Once the market turns around, we will make this right." I laughed. It was a short, sharp sound. "You don't understand, Dad. I didn't pay it off for you. I bought the note." I walked over to him and leaned down so our faces were level. "I am not your savior. I am the bank." And as of 9 a.m. this morning, the title of this house was transferred to a holding company owned by me. I straightened up and looked around the room at the high ceilings, the silk drapes, the marble floors. "This is not your house anymore. It is my house. You are living here because I allow it." "And Brad?" I pointed at the man on the floor who had stopped struggling and was listening in horror. "You are trespassing." I turned to Darius. "Get him out of here." Darius nodded to Chen. They hauled Brad to his feet. He was limp, weeping softly. "And Ebony," I said, turning to my sister, "you can go with him. You wanted to stand by your man, well, here is your chance. Get out of my house." But Zara Ebony pleaded, reaching out a hand. "I have nowhere to go. Our penthouse was seized last week. I have no money." "Then you better start looking for a job," I said coldly. "Maybe you can find a job removing tattoos. I hear dermatology pays well. But you are not staying here. I don't harbor thieves." I looked at my parents. They were huddled together on the sofa, looking small and terrified in the massive room. "You two can stay," I said, "for now. But things are going to change. There will be no more galas, no more vintage wine, no more pretending. You are going to live within your means, which are currently zero. And every time you walk through these halls, you are going to remember that you are guests in the home of the daughter you called a failure." I turned away from them, walking toward the door. The air in the room was heavy with the stench of their ruin. I needed to breathe. I needed to get away from the toxicity that had poisoned me for so long. I signaled to Darius and Chen to drag Brad out to the waiting police cars. The dinner was over. The check had been paid, and I had kept the receipt. The flashing red and blue lights sliced through the darkness of the Potomac night, illuminating the manicured hedges and the stone facade of the estate in a chaotic strobe. The sound of sirens, which had been a distant wail just moments ago, now screamed right outside the front door, deafening and absolute. My father, Julian, stumbled toward the window, pulling back the heavy velvet drapes. His face was ghostly pale in the flashing lights. "It is the police," he whispered, his voice trembling. "Why are the police here?" I stood calmly by the fireplace, watching the panic ripple through the room. "I did not call the police, Dad," I said, my voice cutting through the rising noise. "I called the FBI." The front door burst open. There was no polite knock, no ringing of the doorbell. A team of agents in windbreakers emblazoned with those 3 yellow letters stormed into the foyer. Their boots thudded heavy and authoritative on the marble floor. They moved with a precision that terrified my mother, who shrank back against the sofa, clutching her chest. Bradley Sterling, an agent, shouted, his voice booming off the high ceilings. "Federal agents, show us your hands!" Chen and Darius stepped back, releasing their grip on Brad. My brother-in-law stood there, swaying slightly. His expensive Italian suit rumpled his hair, a mess of sweat and gel. He looked at the agents, and for a second, I saw a flicker of the old arrogance, the belief that he could talk his way out of anything. "This is a misunderstanding," Brad stammered, raising his hands, palms out. "I am a hedge fund manager. I have friends in the Senate. You cannot just barge in here." The lead agent did not pause. He spun Brad around and slammed him against the wall. The sound of his face hitting the plaster made Ebony scream. "You are under arrest for wire fraud, money laundering, and securities fraud," the agent recited, pulling a pair of metal handcuffs from his belt. "You have the right to remain silent." I watched as the cold steel clicked around Brad's wrists. It was a sound I had imagined 1,000 times since I discovered the truth, but hearing it in reality was sweeter than I could have dreamed. It was the sound of justice. It was the sound of the end. Brad began to struggle. He twisted his body, trying to look back at us. His eyes were wild, darting around the room, looking for a lifeline, looking for a scapegoat. They landed on Ebony. She knew, he screamed, his voice cracking with desperation. She knew everything. Ask her. She spent the money. She signed the papers. Ebony recoiled as if he had struck her. Her hands flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with horror. "Brad, what are you saying?" "I didn't. I trusted you. You greedy witch," Brad yelled, as the agents began to drag him toward the door. "You wanted the house in the Hamptons. You wanted the Birkin bags. You told me to do whatever it took. You are just as guilty as I am." Ebony collapsed to her knees, sobbing hysterically. The betrayal was absolute. The man she had defended, the man she had chosen over her own sister, was now trying to drag her down into the cell with him. I felt no pity, only a cold detachment. She had made her bed with silk sheets bought with stolen money, and now she had to lie in it. The agents hauled Brad out of the drawing room. He was kicking and shouting, his protests echoing through the house. My parents stood frozen in the center of the room, watching their golden boy being treated like a common criminal. They looked small. They looked old. The air of superiority that had surrounded them my entire life had evaporated, leaving behind only fear. My father slowly turned his head to look at me. His eyes were wide, filled with a mixture of terror and disbelief. He looked at the red dossier still lying on the table. He looked at the legal documents that proved I owned the roof over his head. And then he looked at me. Really looked at me. He realized in that moment that the daughter he had dismissed, the girl he had called a disappointment, was the only thing standing between him and total ruin. He realized that I held his life in my hands. Zara. He rasped, his voice shaking. You did this. You called them. I sent them the forensic audit 3 hours ago, Dad. I replied steadily. Truth. Scan automatically flags criminal activity to the authorities when it exceeds a certain threshold. Brad crossed that threshold years ago. I just provided the map. My mother made a low, keening sound. But the neighbors, she whimpered. The neighbors will see. I walked over to the window and looked out. The driveway was a circus. The police lights were blinding, but beyond them I could see the street. The quiet, exclusive cul-de-sac was alive with activity. You are right, Mom, I said. The neighbors are seeing everything. I walked out the front door following the agents. The rain had stopped, leaving the air crisp and cold. Brad was being shoved into the back of an unmarked black SUV. He was still shouting, still blaming everyone but himself. I stood on the top step of the porch, looking out at the scene. Across the street, Mrs. Vanderwall, the head of the Homeowners Association, was standing in her driveway, in her silk bathrobe, holding her phone up, recording everything. Next door, the senator's wife was peering through her curtains. A group of teenagers from down the block had gathered on the sidewalk, their phones raised, capturing the downfall of the King family in high definition for TikTok. This was the nightmare my parents had spent their lives trying to avoid. Public humiliation, the loss of face, the shattering of the perfect image. They had sacrificed my happiness, my mental health, and my future to protect this image, and now it was being live-streamed to the world. Brad locked eyes with me through the window of the SUV. He stopped screaming. He just stared. I raised my hand and gave him a small wave. Goodbye, Brad. The car pulled away, tires crunching on the gravel, followed by 2 police cruisers. The sirens faded into the distance, but the murmurs of the neighbors grew louder. I turned back to the house. My parents were standing in the doorway, huddled together like survivors of a shipwreck. Ebony was still on the floor inside, wailing. They looked at me with pleading eyes. They were waiting for me to fix it. They were waiting for me to tell them I had a plan to save their reputation, to make the neighbors forget, to bring back the comfortable lie they had lived in. But I was done fixing things. I was done saving them. I walked past them back into the house. I picked up my clutch purse from the table. I signaled to Darius and Chen. We are done here, I said. My father reached out a trembling hand to stop me. Zara, please. What happens now? Where do we go? I looked at him. I looked at the man who had told me I wasn't smart enough. I looked at the woman who had told me I wasn't graceful enough. You live here, Dad, I said, my voice devoid of emotion. As long as I say you can. But remember, every time you look out that window, every time you see the neighbors whispering, you are living in my house. You are eating food bought with my money. And you are safe because I allow it. I walked out the door and down the steps toward my Bentley. The neighbors lowered their phones as I passed, watching me with a new kind of respect. They didn't see the disappointment anymore. They saw the woman who had cleaned house. I got into the car and closed the door, shutting out the noise, the lights, and the ruins of my family. Drive, I told Silas. As the car pulled away, I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I knew exactly what I was leaving behind. And for the first time in my life, I knew exactly where I was going. The silence that descended on the foyer after the heavy oak door clicked shut was suffocating. The flashing red and blue lights had faded into the distance, leaving the estate in a stillness that felt more like a tomb than a home. The adrenaline that had fueled the confrontation was ebbing away, leaving behind the cold, hard reality of the wreckage. My parents stood in the center of the hallway looking like ghosts haunting their own house. My father Julian was leaning heavily against the wall, his hand trembling as he wiped sweat from his forehead. My mother Vivian was clutching the banister, her eyes darting around the room, as if expecting the furniture to be repossessed at any second. And my sister Ebony was still slumped on the floor, a puddle of emerald green silk and misery. I walked back into the dining room, where the remnants of the disastrous dinner still lay on the table. The congealed lamb, the spilled wine, the shattered glass. It was a perfect tableau of the King family legacy. Broken, messy, and expensive. I picked up my clutch purse and checked my phone. My driver Silas was waiting. I was ready to leave, but I knew I could not walk out just yet. I had to deliver the sentence. I returned to the foyer. My father looked up at me. His eyes were red-rimmed, and for the first time in my life, I did not see the imposing judge who terrified defendants. I saw a scared old man who had lost control of his world. Zara. He croaked, his voice cracking. You bought the debt. You said you bought the debt. Does that mean we have to leave? Are you evicting us? My mother let out a small whimper at the word eviction. She looked at me with wide, pleading eyes. The arrogance was gone. The socialite mask had melted away, leaving a terrified woman who didn't know how to survive without her status. Please, Zara, she whispered. We are too old to start over. We have nowhere to go. All our friends live here. If we leave this neighborhood, we will be pariahs. We will die of shame. I looked at them. I thought about the 18-year-old girl they had kicked out with nothing but a cardboard box. I thought about the cold nights I spent in a studio apartment, wondering if I would make rent. I could do the same to them. I could tell them to pack a bag and get out. It would be poetic justice. It would be fair. But I was not them. You do not have to leave, I said, my voice echoing in the large space. Relief washed over them so visibly, it was like watching a wave break. My mother sobbed and reached out to grab my hand, but I stepped back. Do not celebrate yet, I said sharply. You can stay in this house because I do not want to see my parents homeless. But you are staying here as my tenants, and the terms of your lease are very specific. I walked over to the side table where the mail was piled up, unopened bills that Brad had been hiding. Effective immediately, I am firing the staff. The chef, the housekeeper, the groundskeeper, and the driver. All of them. You cannot afford them, and I am not paying for them. My mother gasped. But who will cook? Who will clean? This house is 10,000 square feet, Zara. I cannot clean this house by myself. Then I suggest you close off the wings you do not use, I replied. You will learn to use a vacuum cleaner, Mom. It is not difficult. Millions of people do it every day. I turned to my father. And the cars, Dad? The leases on the Mercedes and the Bentley are being terminated tomorrow. You will have one car, a reliable sedan that you will pay for with your own money. My father nodded slowly. His shoulders slumped in defeat. He knew he had no bargaining power. He knew he was lucky to have a roof over his head. You will live on your pensions, I continued. No more credit cards, no more lines of credit, no more gala tickets or first-class travel. You are going to live a quiet, modest life within your means. If you need money for groceries, you will use your Social Security. If the roof leaks, you will call me, but if you want to throw a dinner party, you will pay for it yourselves. My father looked at the floor. It is fair, he whispered. It is more than fair. Thank you, Zara. I turned my attention to Ebony. She had pulled herself up from the floor and was leaning against the wall, wiping her mascara-stained face. She looked at me with a flicker of hope, seeing that I had spared our parents. And what about me? She asked, her voice trembling. Brad left me with nothing. Zara. The creditors are going to come for me. They will take my practice. They will take everything. You have $80 million. You could pay off the debts. You could clear my name. It would be nothing to you. Just a small loan. I will pay you back, I swear. I looked at my sister. The golden child. The one who had everything handed to her. The one who had stolen our mother's jewelry to fund a fraud. She still didn't get it. She still thought money was the solution to her character flaws. I am not paying a cent of Brad's debt, I said, cold as ice. And I am certainly not paying yours. You are an accomplice, Ebony. You signed those papers. You benefited from the theft. But I will go to jail, she wailed. If I don't pay them, they will prosecute me too. Then you better get a good lawyer, I said. But you are not getting one with my money. She stepped forward, reaching for me, desperate. Then let me stay here. Let me live with Mom and Dad. I can help them. I can help clean the house. Please, Zara, I cannot be on the street. I have a reputation. I shook my head. No, Ebony, you are not staying here. This house is for our parents. You are 36 years old. You are a doctor. Hey, you have a degree that Dad paid for. You have a career. I walked to the front door and opened it wide. The night air rushed in, cleansing the stagnant atmosphere of the house. You are going to leave, I said, pointing to the darkness. You are going to find a small apartment. You are going to take extra shifts at the clinic. You are going to sell your designer clothes and your handbags. You are going to learn what it costs to buy a gallon of milk. Ebony stared at me, her mouth open in shock. You are kicking me out. You are kicking your own sister out on the street in the middle of the night. I am doing exactly what you and Brad told me to do, I said. I am applying tough love. She looked at our parents, begging them to intervene. Mom. Dad, tell her. Tell her she cannot do this. My mother looked away, tears streaming down her face. She knew she had no power. She knew that if she spoke up, she might lose the roof over her own head. My father just closed his eyes and turned his back. You are on your own, Ebony, I said. Just like I was. Ebony let out a scream of frustration. You are a monster. You are enjoying this. You are cruel. I am not cruel, I said, my voice steady and calm. I am not tansing you. I am not sending you to prison. I am giving you the greatest gift anyone has ever given you. I walked over to her and looked her dead in the eye. I am teaching you the lesson that Brad loved to preach at the dinner table. I am teaching you about financial responsibility. I gestured to the door. Now get out. Ebony looked around the room one last time, realizing that no one was coming to save her. She grabbed her purse and ran out the door, sobbing into the night. I watched her go. I watched her stumble down the stone steps in her expensive heels and run toward her car, which would likely be repossessed in the morning. I closed the heavy oak door and locked it. I turned back to my parents. They stood there in the silence, looking small and gray in their finery. I will have the lease agreement sent over in the morning, I said. Read it carefully. I didn't wait for a response. I walked past them, my heels clicking on the marble, walking out of the house that was now mine, but would never be my home. I had balanced the ledger, I had closed the account, and for the first time in my life, I felt light. The morning sun broke over the Potomac River, casting long golden shadows across the manicured lawns of the estate. The air was crisp and clean, scrubbed new by the storm that had passed both the literal rain and the metaphorical hurricane that had torn through the King household the night before. I stood on the front porch, the heavy oak door closed behind me. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the scent of damp earth and boxwood hedges. For 32 years, this air had tasted like anxiety. It had tasted like the pressure to be perfect, the fear of being less than, the bitter metallic tang of rejection. Today it just tasted like air. I turned around and looked at the house one last time. It stood there imposing and grand with its red brick facade and white pillars. Growing up, this building had been a fortress, a temple where I was expected to worship at the altar of my family's ego. It had been a prison where my dreams were confiscated and replaced with their expectations. I used to look at these windows and wonder what I had to do to belong inside. I used to touch the brick and wish I could absorb some of its strength. Now I looked at it, and I felt nothing. No fear, No longing, no anger. The emotional tether that had snapped me back to this place time and time again was gone. The house was no longer a symbol of my inadequacy. It was just a structure. It was four walls and a roof. It was wood and stone and glass. It was a line item on a spreadsheet. It was asset number 4 in the King Real Estate Holding LLC portfolio. I owned the mortgage. I owned the equity. I owned the very ground it stood on. The monsters inside were no longer giants, they were just my tenants living on a lease that I could terminate at will. The power shift was so absolute it was almost disorienting, like stepping off a boat onto solid ground after weeks at sea. I walked down the stone steps, my heels clicking a steady rhythm. I did not rush. I did not run. I walked with the easy pace of a woman who had nowhere to be, but exactly where she wanted. The driveway was empty now. The police cruisers were gone. The neighbors had retreated behind their curtains, probably nursing their coffees and their gossip. The black Bentley was waiting for me, the engine purring softly, a beast ready to carry me away. Silas was standing by the open rear door, his posture perfect, his face impassive. He had seen everything last night. He had seen the arrest, the screaming, the tears. But he looked at me now with a quiet nod of respect. He didn't see the little girl who used to cry in her room. He saw the CEO. "Good morning, Ms. King," Silas said, his voice low and steady. "I trust you slept well." "I slept better than I have in a decade, Silas," I replied. I slid into the back seat, sinking into the leather that smelled of success and freedom. Silas closed the door with a solid thud, sealing me inside my own private sanctuary. The tint on the windows turned the bright morning into a cool, serene twilight. I looked out at the house one last time as the car began to move. I saw a curtain twitch in the upstairs window of the master bedroom. My mother watching me go. I didn't wave. I didn't feel the need to offer one last gesture of reassurance. She had her house. She had her husband. She had the consequences of her choices. That was enough. "Where to, Ms. King?" Silas asked, catching my eyes in the rearview mirror. "Are we heading back to the office?" I sat back, crossing my legs and smoothing the fabric of my dress. I thought about the office. I thought about the servers humming in the dark, the lines of code that had brought me here, the team that was waiting for me. But that wasn't where I was going. Not today. Today was for the future. "Take us to Dulles, Silas." I said, a small smile playing on my lips. "I have a meeting in Silicon Valley. The partners at Sequoia want to discuss the Series B for my next venture. And after that, I think we need to make a stop." "A stop, ma'am?" Silas asked. "Yes," I said, looking out at the trees blurring past. "I want to go to a shelter. I think it is time I got a dog. A real one. Not a prop for a family photo. A companion who knows the meaning of loyalty." Silas smiled, his eyes crinkling in the mirror. "That sounds like a fine plan, Ms. King. A very fine plan indeed." The car accelerated, gliding effortlessly onto the highway, leaving the prestigious zip code of Potomac behind. I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone. It was the old phone, the one with the cracked screen, the one that held years of desperate text messages, ignored calls, and pleading voicemails. It held the digital history of a daughter begging to be loved. It held the contacts for people who only called when they needed money or a scapegoat. I looked at it for a long moment. It felt heavy in my hand, heavy with the weight of ghosts. I thought about deleting the messages. I thought about blocking the numbers. But that felt like maintenance. That felt like keeping the door cracked open just a sliver. I didn't want a crack. I wanted a wall. I rolled down the window. The wind rushed in loud and chaotic, whipping my hair around my face. It felt bracing. It felt like cleansing fire. I pressed my thumb against the side of the phone and popped the SIM card tray open. I pulled the tiny chip out. It was such a small thing to hold so much pain. It was a microchip of misery. I held it between my thumb and forefinger, letting the wind buffer it. "Goodbye," I whispered. Not to them, but to the version of me that needed them. I flicked my wrist. The SIM card spun away into the wind, a tiny speck of gold and plastic disappearing instantly into the blur of the highway. It was gone. The connection was severed. The line was dead. I tossed the phone onto the seat beside me. I would buy a new one when I landed. A new number, a new list of contacts, a list filled with people who respected me, people who challenged me, people who showed up. I sat back and watched the world rush by. The sun was higher now, burning off the last of the morning mist. The road ahead was wide open, stretching out toward the horizon, toward California, toward the future, toward a life that was finally fully, completely mine. I closed my eyes and let the sun warm my face. The screen faded to black, but for me the movie was just starting. Zara's journey teaches us a powerful truth. Your value is never determined by those who refuse to see it, even if they share your DNA. For years, she sought validation from a family that only valued superficial status, but she ultimately found freedom by embracing her own path. Her story reminds us that family is defined by respect and loyalty, not just bloodlines. Breaking toxic cycles often requires painful boundaries, but walking away from people who drain you is the only way to build a life that truly belongs to you. Success is sweet, but peace is the ultimate victory. If you've ever had to choose your own peace over family expectations, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories of resilience and triumph.